Будем обсуждать корпоративную безопасность. Я считаю, что на данный момент это, наверное, один из самых серьезных и острых вопросов. Но если посмотреть на прошедший год, то, наверное, тема взломов, хакеров, корпоративных данных стала ведущей во всех информационных агентствах. Последняя неделя дала нам кучу пищи для размышления, и я думаю, что президенты всех стран и корпораций высказали свое мнение по этому поводу. Поэтому тема у нас важная и серьезная, будем говорить четко, серьезно и по делу. Поэтому начать я хотел бы нашу сессию с анекдота. Если помните такой анекдот, когда лось после встречи с друзьями утром выходит на водопой, пьет, и тут охотник из-за кустов ему баба.
Now, in this joke, a deer is drinking water from a river.
Лось пьет, поднимает голову. Нормально, мы так вчера посидели. Я все пью, а мне все хуже и хуже. Вот по сути, я думаю, что это, наверное, будет рефрен нашей сегодняшней сессии, в том смысле, что мы как бы все строим безопасность, все строим, строим и строим, а если судить по новостному фону, то как бы все хуже и хуже, ломают и ломают. И у нас сегодня по формату, у нас будет 3 вопроса, каждый вопрос по полчаса. После каждой получасовой такой маленькой сессии мы дадим место для 2-3 вопросов из зала. Вот там есть микрофон, но вопросы должны быть именно по конкретной обсуждаемой теме, не просто так. Вот. И также у нас есть чатик в Телеграме. Соответственно, все, кто хочет, присоединяйтесь, задавайте вопросы, я буду их видеть, эти комментарии, буду озвучивать всем, как говорится, чмоки в этом чатике. Да? Итак, начнем. Для начала представлю, соответственно, наших гостей-экспертов. Александр Баранов представляет Высшую школу экономики, имеет громадный опыт работы в разных госструктурах и понимает, как строятся большие и крупные информационные системы размера страны. Тимур Юнусов, наш ведущий эксперт, который ломает все, что движется. Вот. В последнее время специализируется на банковской тематике, отлично понимает всю историю, связанную там с банкоматами, онлайн-банкингами и т.д. Сергей Лебедь представляет Сбербанк. И, я думаю, на текущий момент одну из крупнейших служб информационной безопасности в России. Но все мы понимаем, что банки наиболее часто и наиболее жестко подвергаются атакам злоумышленников, и поэтому имеет серьезный опыт, собственно, отражения реальных атак. Роман Калина представляет судебный департамент, и в данном нашем совещании представляет не только информационную безопасность, но он также отвечает и за разработку, собственно, информационной системы софта, и может взглянуть на эту проблему глазами, собственно, разработчика. Правильно? Значит, Сергей Данилов представляет Гренатом и отвечает за стандартизацию в отрасли во всей вот в этом громадном хозяйстве. Значит, кто у нас следующий? Муслим Меджлумов, директор Центра кибербезопасности Ростелекома и, в моем понимании, один из ведущих вообще экспертов в России в области сетевой безопасности. И Сергей Гордейчик. Сергей, собственно, всем известный эксперт, в свое время стоял вообще у истоков создания Positive Hack Days. Многое, что вы здесь видите, в свое время было сделано, придумано, собственно, именно Сергеем. Еще к нам может присоединиться один человек, которого мы звали. Вообще мы, в принципе, звали много кого. Я даже думаю, что можно отдельно вывешивать список того, кого звали, но он не пришел. Вот. Я думаю, это так будет характеризовать, потому что такой честный разговор на ПХД немногие готовы, собственно, выдержать. Итак, начнем. Первый вопрос. Я бы, собственно, начал с, может быть, такого конкретного ведь частного вопроса, но мне кажется, он очень хорошо характеризует ситуацию. Это защищенность внешнего периметра. В чем тут как бы проблема? Придешь к любому человеку, отвечающему за безопасность, он скажет: смотрите, ребят, ну у нас все нормально, внешний периметр у нас четкий, вот схема сети, Евгений, проходи, вот схема сети, вот фаервол, все защищено. Но по факту, когда мы проводим свои исследования, то в более чем в половине, 55% исследованных нами систем, нарушитель с минимальными знаниями и низкой квалификацией мог преодолеть внешний периметр. При этом средний возраст уязвимости на внешнем периметре достигает нескольких лет. Есть уязвимости, которые там живут по 9, самое рекордное – это 17 лет уязвимости. Причем вирус его на край последней недели, но он просто, мне кажется, показал эту температуру по больнице. Ну, представьте, вирус, который заражает торчащие в интернет Windows машины с поднятыми там нетбиусами и шарами, да еще и не патченными, когда патч вышел 2 месяца назад, заражает кучу серьезных организаций.
And it is really the story of so many well-known organizations. That was, in fact, a pretty low-level attack, wasn't it? You know, had the perps actually packaged it into a USB drive or an email-based attack, it would have been even more devastating. So the question to the experts is, how come? The external perimeter so often is indeed very poorly secured. What can be done to eradicate that? Oh, let me introduce Yevgeny Klim, who has just joined us. Yevgeny is now working for an integrator, but he previously worked as a consultant and on the customer side as well, so he's got a wealth of experience. Hi, everybody.
Значит, на мой взгляд, самая главная проблема заключается в том, что информационная безопасность находится в качестве подложки под...
Is a kind of a substrate. And you know, very often, what companies often do is leave their ports open because they need functionality, they don't need information security. And also, it's a story about negligence, right? You know, installing the patches, installing the updates is a pain in the neck. You know, you never know if the patch itself is buggy or not, so you would naturally want to wait at least a bit of time. Or so they argue, so they reason. And as the moderators correctly pointed out, superficially it might seem okay, and actually information security people are not that dumb. There is a method to their madness. Oh, that was a pretty strong statement. I believe there are two elements to the problem here. One is that there are two worlds of the information security, so to speak. One is compliance, so it's pretty remote from your daily needs, but very closely tied with your daily problems. And the other one is about your functional operations. Now, I remember a different conference on the 17th of April on information security, not as grand, naturally, as PH days. So I asked the people in that conference whether they actually had a good weekend or not, because you may remember there was a major announcement from shadow brokers the previous week, and most participants actually had no idea that something got published, which means that these two worlds don't often meet. And actually, updating systems is not that easy. You know, say, roll on your updates is easy, but it's easily said than done. You know, quite often, when you do that, you know, you may easily disrupt your critical processes. So it is a pretty convoluted issue. On the one hand, you know, some, practical reasons may stand in the way, and on the other hand, updating your critical infrastructure can be quite difficult. Now that you've called it two different worlds, I like to add my 2 cents. I'm not sure we can call them practitioners and theoreticians. I'd rather say defenders and attackers. So attackers find jailbreaks for iPhones, you know, crack SS7 and ATMs. They do their research, they talk at conferences, and they say, you know, we've been able to crack it. Start protecting yourself, and they are very responsible quite often. Their disclosures, very often they tell the vendors about the vulnerabilities months ahead or years ahead, but defenders are not like that, you know. Defenders only start working, you know, when shit hits the fan, which is paradoxical, because the hackers who disclose those vulnerabilities, you know, they're putting themselves 6 feet under. Because for some reason, however much time they allocate to defenders to patch their defenses up, it's never enough. You know, finally, hackers have learned how to steal one-time passwords through SS7. You know, for 2 years, we've been telling the telecom companies, you will have issues. And, you know, they've been sitting on the fence saying, we are fine. Same applies to ATMs, same applies to so many other systems. We're talking about protection and security of external services. In view of the recent attack, we should be even more mindful about Windows services. But then, you know what? There are so many other services that also need better protection, such as email, web services, or FTP services. Naturally, situations like this will continue to occur. What's also important here is to what extent information security people are prepared to react fast to new incidents like this. It doesn't really matter what kind of service we're talking about. It should be pretty clear that at any point in time, any service can be compromised like that when, you know, it's infected through an open port, and then a virus will spread quickly throughout a corporate infrastructure. Which means that we certainly need to comply with the recommendations that have just been voiced by my colleagues here, but we also need to be very good in terms of discovering those issues ASAP. Well, we do have defenders and attackers in this market, just like we have them in PhDs. I believe that if we are very successful, then eventually, you know, attackers will be as hard to find online as they are hard to find offline now. Well, I'm referring to my system now, Gas Pravosudия, or State Automated System for court administration. And I previously worked on a previous system for elections. Well, it's not the fanciest system you can find around, but you know what? It is pretty reliable. So a bucket of air is one of our best protections.
Совсем другой уровень. Поэтому мы продолжим.
So what we do, we mostly protect ourselves internally. Well, naturally, we need to provide eBay services. Well, the only thing I wanted to add here is that and Timur will correct me if I'm wrong. Well, we've heard about ACS, automated control systems, and ATMs being infected by the same virus. So I believe the biggest issue is that people tend to believe that they are not vulnerable because they have an isolated and insulated system. But in fact, at present day, it's nearly impossible to have your system fully insulated from the outside world. We tend to believe that if we have developed a set of documents, or if somebody operating on our behalf has got the set of documents, we should be okay. And very often we have those competence centers or centers of excellence on information security, and you usually see those seniors there who they look very serious. The problem is that they don't have to know a lot about information security. Muslim? I think it's a serious issue. I don't really think you can put it into very simple words here, but I'll make an attempt. I'll take a stab. I believe what most organizations do is just buy hardware, and it's easier for them to actually explain why they bought equipment from vendor A, as opposed to explaining why they bought several information security solutions. So very often, if they are well protected, it is because they've hired good people on IS side. So we certainly need to increase the level of our information security maturity and develop the skills of our own employees. So it doesn't really matter which hardware you're running if you meet these two requirements. I'll take WannaCry, for example. None of the vendors had the signatures. Which is sort of stupid, right? You're employing devices that cost 10 to 30 million, and they still let the attack in. Let me argue with that, Muslim. You probably know better than I do that even Snort had some primitive signatures. On which day? That was Friday evening. So we told them, guys, the first thing we gotta do is hide your machines from the external perimeter. Let us scan all your machines in the external perimeter. Only one company out of 10 told us, you know, the addresses, so to speak, of the external perimeter. And one customer gave us a mask 16 address range, which actually includes some of our own addresses. No, very often companies don't know what to update because they don't do their stock taking or their, you know, network discovery, so to speak, properly. Well, but that's a no-brainer, right? You should know which of your IP addresses are sticking out on the internet. It doesn't really depend on your updating processes. It's a no-brainer. That's something I wanted to start my speech with. Based on my experience, both in security analysis, I know that the larger a corporation is, the poorer is its knowledge of its own perimeter. So when we start preparing for a penetration test, no, very often we're told, oh, this is our network, we've got like 24 machines there, but when I do cyber threat intelligence, what happens very often is that, you know, we discover dozens of other organizations having access to the same network. Well, they're small, they may be affiliated, but they don't know. So all it took is short on a scan CIO. So port 445 is usually sticking out. Naturally, perimeter protection starts with an inventory taking exercise. But you know what? Let me start with a story. You know, that's an eternal one, really. After code red Nimdo, that actually downed a number of my applications because they were poorly patched, really, and they relied on poorly patched EISA. So I remember information security at that time, and you know what? Things haven't changed that much since then. Now, take this whole IoT story, for example. So Microsoft and Apple, they seem to be pretty serious about security, aren't they? Don't they? But you know, what these guys are doing is install the old Linux with default passwords on old hardware. And they run it as the very core of an industrial network, supporting hundreds of ATMs. Should we be surprised with cases like Mirai? You know, those dumb devices are becoming more and more prevalent, and we expect them to get smarter, but do they? There is another problem that I don't think has been properly addressed by the industry yet, and that is application security. So I'm referring to the development of own software. Well, because nobody's really caring about security of custom code or CMS when we need to produce so much new software all the time. A pen test will not tell you anything about vulnerabilities of your partners, while cyber threat intelligence can actually help you in that department. So patching, for example, port 445 on Windows in order to remove a particular vulnerability is a useful thing if you want to curb WannaCry. But you know what? That's a very natural thing to do in any case, right? WannaCry self-propagated, you know, it didn't rely on any email campaigns or what have you. Now, it only requires you to be poorly protected. And you know what? It also made me think of Morrison and Code Red Nimda. You know, it's like 16 years later, we're still making the same mistakes. Guys, you have a chance now to ask your questions. I'm going to read a question from Telegram now, but then will be followed with a question from the audience. Now, this question is about SOC. What do you think is the role of SOC in reducing the level of threat? Well, they say that the Central Bank of the Russian Federation is feeling very optimistic. What's your take on that? Anybody would like to answer the question? Evgeny, shoot. Security Operations Center is an indispensable security attribute. When properly done, it's not a giant room with screens and what have you, but it's rather an attitude to operational security. You may actually have a strong SOC with 2 people or with a distributed team. What matters is that they monitor and they effectively and efficiently respond to infrastructure events. Very often, suppliers will tell you that SOCs are, you know, those major expensive solutions, but it doesn't have to be the case, right? It's a matter of culture primarily. You can actually call it whatever you like. It doesn't have to be called SOC. You can call it Information Security Officer on duty, as long as he does what he expected to. That's monitor events and make right decisions. I think it happens in every industry, not just in IS, you know, where marketing effectively, you know, conquers common sense and individual words like SOC become buzzwords. So SOC, or rather the most important part of SOC, is the SLAs and the range of services it provides to the corporation. So you can have an internal or an external, an outsourced SOC that will help you escalate threats, or will help you react fast to any dangers, any threats. So SOC is a nice concept. It is based on a range of IT service concepts. There is nothing particularly new about it. But the big question is, what kind of SLAs do you provide? Because saying we have SOC is a pretty stupid thing to say. Actually, we are going to have a separate stream discussing SOCs. Well, after all, we are a visionary sort of event. Sorry. So testing should help you discover bugs, but most importantly, it should guide your test drive development, so to speak. Now I'm thinking of hack drive security as a similar concept, where SOC would be more than just a range of services. Ideally, it should work at the core of your information security department and should therefore guide future development of your security suites. Well, I've been involved in a number of epidemic management efforts. I believe that SOC usually is not in the lead when you have an incident. Well, say when an information network goes down, or a service goes down, or workstations go dark, usually it's the IT people who are at the helm, so to speak, of the response effort. And information security people, with all due respect, are not in the lead. So it's very important to work hand in hand. So if you ask me, I'd rather build not an SOC, but rather a hybrid center between SOC and an IT monitoring center. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So far we are doing perfect in our agenda. Let's move on to the next question. Please use the mic. We promise we're not toxic. We'll be happy to entertain your questions, particularly if they pertain to the subject of our discussion here. Okay, our next subject here is internal security. I think everybody has already mentioned that. And it's also shown by our research that the average lifetime of a perp on your network. And you know what? Whenever we do our pen test, we pretty much always discover baddies on the network. And the average lifetime is like 3 goddamn years. For 3 years on average, you know, people are sitting on your network. And we've had cases where they were there for 9 years. My question to the experts, what shall we do about it? Do you think it can be kind of contained, curbed, minimized? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Well, let me start by saying that there are internal and external foes. Are we talking about insiders? No. What I'm saying is that external perps, you know, may penetrate the perimeter and they have access. Well, like some of your machines can be part of a botnet. Well, this clearly shows you're not properly controlling your network, right? So what can you do? Keep checking for dubious programs or software, right? It's pretty difficult to do that because all the software you're using will be updating regularly and will keep changing, therefore. The certification doesn't help much. And in countries where legislation is also very volatile, like Russia, it's even more difficult. So it's pretty difficult to know with regard to a particular piece of software whether it's bona fide or not. Moreover, some of the malware will also mimic, right? So probably you gotta recognize that some things you'll never ever be able to discover or root out. You know, I keep saying that we are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because we've got information security juxtaposed with operational functionality. And very often people compromise willfully their information security because they want to have better operationality, reliability, or convenience. You know what, when we tried doing information security the right way, you know, everything that's in the book, I don't know, our business years nearly killed us. And this is the same that's gonna happen pretty much in every corporation. And adaptive systems, you know, they can only be protected with adaptive security, such as SOC. And solutions like this will work if you have a proper punishment system, but you can't really think of any system like this. Well, the Ministry of Interior in this country has got something relatively good, but it's still a drop in the bucket compared to the number of people who actually want to wreak havoc in it. There is still a very underspread, so to speak, a realization that doing things like this is actually dangerous. Has it ever happened that, you know, people would be proactively thinking about security? Well, back in our empire times, that did happen. You know, when we did so much espionage on our own that we actually cared a lot about counter-espionage as well. So, in most countries, you know, attacking comes first, ahead of defense. So very few people actually take care, you know, pay any attention to those kind of threats. Those kinds of threats. That's why many people thinking about information security, you know, often say, well, you know, we can wait for a couple of years. So how do we root out the stuff that's already on the inside? I think you can deliver a whole lecture on that. Okay, as an integrator, what you tell your customers? Say you have a customer telling you, we've got this network, and I want to make totally sure there is nobody there whom I don't know. What's your proposal? Well, I'll say, for starters, that nobody can give you a 100% guarantee it won't be cracked, you know? Nothing will stand up to an APT, for example. But you gotta do your AVs, your patching, continuous security, scanning, and also you gotta control the flows and monitor the flows, both inbound and outbound. We've got sandboxes, for example, that we can integrate or connect. What's also important, and something that hasn't been really appreciated by a number of corporations, is the integration of threat intelligence feeds. These are strategic indicators. Because so much knowledge has been accumulated around the world, and it makes a lot of sense to learn from that. So how do you discover something that's already inside? Anomaly detection systems should help a lot, both in network traffic and in user behavior. That's pretty clear, but conceptually speaking, I think everybody realizes we gotta do gross models and what have you. Now imagine you're told you gotta spend that much money to protect yourselves from primitive attacks. It will take like 2 years, right? Well, it sort of makes sense, right? But you can't really sell it, can you? Yeah, right, but we all know how sales like this happen, you know? You send your pen testers in, you sow, wreak havoc, people start panicking, then you can sell pretty much anything. That's a business process, right? No, but I'm not talking about how to sell systems like this, but rather to build systems like this. Say, if you have a client, you know, there is only so much you can protect in the first 2 years if you're starting from scratch. So, even with sizable investments required for that, you know, for the next 5 years, you won't be well secured. So everybody wants to have a holistic information security system. Everybody wants a magic pill. But it's impossible. What are we discussing here? That's an impossibility. Well, first, you know, there will be holes in every product out there. Why is that? Because there is no technology, no technique for secure programming. Secondly, the algorithms that underlie a major system keep changing. Very often, software developers have to react very fast. They have to be agile. They make more mistakes. Timur? Yevgeny? Anything else you want to say? So much more I can tell you. If we introduce a new metric now, that is time, it will be easier to have this discussion. Indeed, no system can be totally secure. Well, you certainly know that it takes our pen testers 2 to 7 days to get admin domains and to start exercising their control over a network. Well, we've got more chutzpah, we are more arrogant compared to hackers in the banking system. Well, for some of them, you know, it has taken several years to sneak their way to ARM, KBR, and start stealing the money. Well, pen testers can be more brutish in their work. No system will be fully isolated. You know, we've got social engineering, we've got web, which means that nobody is secure. Now you've broken through the perimeter, and then you have got this sort of window of 1 or 2 months. And everybody should behave like they're at a war. At least if you're an information security professional. I ask people at banks, you know, they should have this feeling that they must have been broken into, but they never know if this has already happened or if it is only happening right now. Sergey? I believe it is important for us to think back to this culture of risk management. In my opinion, it is underdeveloped in a number of organizations. Well, it's actually sort of a simple thing, because you analyze the threats, you develop a roster, a register of them, you map your responses. But modern systems are humongous, you know, they change so quickly. But there is always the most important thing to remember. That would be service availability in telecoms or money in banks. The main assets you gotta protect. Okay, imagine you've got a Trojan on your network, on a particular station that is not involved in any particular process. If the same happens in a banking system, Well, let me put it differently. If money is not impacted, maybe it's not that much of a problem. So much really depends on the kind of assets we're talking about. Managing cybersecurity risks is a pretty old thing, right? Remember 1990s, we had so many methodologies, so many conferences where those things were discussed. And eventually we kind of lulled ourselves into feeling secure. Or rather into feeling that, doing proper risk management is such a difficult thing. Actually, I believe that what's happening now is that people are producing so many long documents that have got so little to do with real life. And very often we believe that we've properly quantified our risks. Well, in fact, we haven't. I've got two answers to your question and you won't like one of them. Okay, we've already said that we are at war already. Because, there are gangs around, and there are experts who will tell you, will tell you which gangs to be afraid of and which doors to rely on. You also have your information security expert who tells you, hire me, we'll get for you SOC or something, which is good for sales, but we also need a more secure environment. Well, nobody wants solutions that will dramatically change the nature of the internet. But we certainly, as a society, require a solution that will make us all more secure and will shoot in the foot producers of doors. Well, I do believe that our employees working with secure databases do not need access to emails, Telegram, or what have you. Well, we do our updates twice per year. We've got signed software with hard-coded, so to speak, signatures. We can do it on our own. And we fully control the range of applications we are running. So we are actually, thanks to our nature, so to speak, more secure than banks, for example, who need to be exposed to the internet much more. This subject I raised in the previous PhD. Those who buy processors or services often find themselves in a pretty difficult situation. As one of the executives of Positive Technologies, I'm partially responsible for developing information security systems for the company, and it was actually a pretty interesting experience for me. Because you have your information security expert who tells you, we need your money, but we cannot really guarantee protection. And if I tell them, maybe you can do it without the money, because vendors and integrators, they will ask you for even more money, and they cannot really guarantee anything. So take a door, for example, and we all have locks in our doors. So if we buy a door with the best lock you can find, we all know that, say, like 2 years later, you will be able to open the same lock with a ruler. Same applies to cars, for example, right? But we never really update our locks or our car alarms, although the same really applies to their security. Well, because here we try to invest in better civil or public safety, right? We try to curb so many potential crimes that will stem, for example, from availability of fake IDs. But people do sell SIM cards openly, easily. You don't need registration. We'll even have events for hackers, like this one. Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. Sergey? Well, first thing is that corporations rarely know their infrastructure inside out. Secondly, there is poor interaction between telecoms, information security, and IT people. You know, everybody knows like there's a small chunk of operations, and that's it really. So until we set up this collaboration properly, you know, we won't have proper information security. And very often, you know, you have people in telecom companies, for example, who know very little about information security. You know, if you put the right person in, things will change dramatically. Well, we've been doing information security at Ross Telecom for quite some time, but we only created this SOC Central last year, in September, I think. We still don't have a silver bullet, but let me explain the kind of approach we're trying to implement now. We believe there are 4 types of perpetrators: solo hackers, hacktivists, criminal gangs, and nation-state hackers. So the first 3 groups can be protected or defended against. Well, APTs, well, they will actually require a substantial effort to counter. So we've broken our infrastructure into domains and subdomains, and we've developed a threat map. We're not really applying any particular methodology. Well, naturally, we've studied Octave and ICVT, a number of other methodologies. We're not trying to develop a document, you know, a paper Bible that could be promoted by consultants. We're developing a functional day-to-day tool. It's effectively an Excel-based map of threats and vulnerabilities, domains and subdomains for those as well. And we've scored all the risks. So in the areas where we have the most critical systems, we want our defenses to be good enough to stand up to APTs. We still do not have tools that would tell us that we're, say, 95% secure. The way we work is how we have a group of architects that sort of design our security infrastructure, but we always double check what they've and software developers have done with a pen test. But there's always homework to do. So we have this rule that we run pen tests on a regular basis. That way we increase our maturity. Well, you can easily close or, you know, shield your applications with AVs and what have you, but the life cycle has become so short now. That's application lifetime apparently. That sometimes it's actually pretty different. So we are now implementing secure software development life cycle. So we're trying to build information security into our sandbox, hoping that it will give us at least an illusion that at a time when a new application is deployed, it will enjoy a certain level of security. We actually have a similar question on the chat about app security. I understand that app security is a pain in the neck for software developers. how difficult it is for you to come to an agreement with software developers. Well, they are our customers. We give them those hands-on workshops where we explain matters of information security. We tell them what the minimal requirements should be. Do they agree with what you say? Oh yeah. Well, you can still argue with them how much we need to invest in that. We still cannot share results with you, right? Because it's still work in progress. I'm wondering how you were able to attract those developers. What did you tell them, really? How did you persuade them? I recommend everybody joins the chat because it's really on fire. Lots of interesting things happening there. I worked for software developers for like 10 years. And I think it has only recently become a major trend that everybody should do information security. And very often people tell me, why would you need a budget for that? Can't you just build information security in? We often have to explain that, you can't really do that way. Now imagine you're told that you don't have any budget, but you need to turn an existing piece of software into a user-friendly piece of software that has been integrated with some federal information system. It's a new requirement. It requires integration, it requires time, it requires resources. So you gotta recognize it's an important requirement that has to be treated as such. Why do the bad guys live on our networks? Back in the times when I did pen tests, more than anything else, I really enjoyed saying, how come, guys? That was such a clear-cut vulnerability. I do more incident investigation now compared to pen tests. And you know what? I can easily relate to what the baddies are thinking. They must be really laughing their asses off looking at stupid mistakes we keep making. So we discovered a system that had been hacked like a year previously, so the perps couldn't really monetize it. They sold access to a different gang. For 2 weeks they tried to launch Crypter, but the AVS system stood in the way, so they got admin rights, they switched the AV off, and then they launched the Crypter. Easy peasy, if you ask me. I believe that historically information security in this country has been focusing on preventive controls. We've mostly been trying to prevent attacks. So take 31S or the other ABCs of information security, they all tell you that you need both preventive, corrective, and detective. And the new fad of the industry, predictive tools. Please know that networks don't have memory, so when you do incident investigation, it is nearly impossible to discover what was happening on the network more than 2 weeks ago. Very often you can mine the data you need from the logs or drive images. So I think it's a very useful assumption that perps are smarter than you are, because they are professionals. They've been doing it for so many years, particularly state-sponsored ones. Even if you discover them later, that's still a kind of victory, ain't it? So we've got this practice now of cyber threat hunting. So you can do it on SOC or on top of SOC. What's different here is that you don't really respond to what has been discovered by SOC, but you rather assume from the outset you have been cracked. And if your defense and protection mechanisms do not identify any issues, well, that's even more worrisome. Nothing is as bad as silence, right? Well, our usual attitude is that when you don't have any alerts in SOC, you should be happy. But this methodology tells you don't have a single alert, you must be in real trouble. In order to develop such an attitude, you need detective tools, you need threat intelligence, and you also need security memory on the network. Yeah, right. It's like when your kids, you don't hear your kids at home, that's really worrisome. Dactyloscopy is a science that helps you identify the perpetrator. It's actually a pretty young science, right? It's only 115 years old. You know, for 5,000 years it has been impossible for us to trace people based on their fingerprints. So I'm guessing we may actually be a very young industry. Maybe sometime later we will develop the right tools for that. For digital dactyloscopy, I mean. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody would like to use the mic? Well, you guys must be really scared. Well, people in our chat are asking many questions about information exchange during incidents. And you know what? We've invited so many regulators to participate in this session, and I think that their active participation shows how serious they are about practical security. People are asking me several questions on this chat. What are the top 3 threats for enterprise clients? And top 5 protections against those. Would you like to think about those questions? In the meanwhile, we are going to discuss information exchanges. I believe it's nearly impossible to protect my network on my own. If I know what kind of attacks are being mounted against my neighbors, it will be easier for me to protect my network. Abroad, they have got this major market where they sell feeds. In this country, it's still in its embryo stage. Quite often, public sector can actually take initiative and accumulate those feeds and share them internally, you know, with the other agencies. My question to experts now: to what extent do you think such information exchange may be useful? I understand everybody would like to get this information. But are you prepared to share your information in the same manner? And what kind of role should the state play? Or do you think it should be a function of the state? I believe that information exchange here and now is lousy and it will never be great. Moreover, I'm totally certain that organizations will not share information on the problems that arise out of their negligence. You know, if you start talking about your problems, well, this means you actually put your boss under threat. And that will lead to some very uncomfortable discussions with your boss. Who will tell you, I gave you money to provide information security. You failed and now you're bad-mouthing me. The right publicity you should provide is that everything is fine, we're the best company in the market. If you say something different, no thank you. I actually disbelieve that somebody can actually, you know, say something else. I believe that all corporations in this particular respect are very similar. I do not believe efficient information exchange is possible. Therefore, there is a very important role to be played by the public sector, because the public sector can actually develop threat models. Well, there is a value associated with what the regulators do. You know, they've accumulated information. It usually is far and beyond what a single enterprise can do. Well, if you're a large and professional company, you can be good at what you do. But very few companies actually have it as a core competence. Any example like that usually creates negative publicity. I believe that you will find the same problems in other countries as well. I wouldn't really count on things changing significantly in this respect. The only thing you can do, you can establish a self-regulatory organization that would, as a black box, collect this data. Well, you know what? In the United States, a company that has been hacked is mandated by the law to disclose the incident publicly and commission investigation. And I think it's a major driver towards the development of the industry and the market. Well, they are not happy to do that, but they are legislatively required to. What kind of liability are they facing? Will they be sued or what? Tell me about this country. I understand about the United States. But there is no liability here, right? You know, very often we are involved in litigation around faked electronic digital signatures. You know, very often, you know, we're dealing with faked physical signatures. Will it take people to court over that? No. Well, there is. It's pretty difficult to provide core protection in the information security field. No offense intended for the core department people here. Well, back in Soviet times, information security was a no-brainer. Now, I must be one of the last Mohicans here who still remember what it was like. Well, back in KGB times, information security was of paramount importance. Well, because we all knew our enemies back then, right? But do we really have a badly felt need like this? Well, there is a need, but it's not a badly felt. Well, in order to have an effective protection system, you don't really need to share all the details, particularly details about all the systems that have been impacted. But if you can at least share information about the kind of signatures used to mount an attack against you, that will already be a great step ahead, won't it? Or these are the IP addresses, these are the signatures used. Who is going to do civil security? I'd rather you don't touch this subject. Because what you're proposing here is a civil information security. Well, it's pretty clear who's responsible for the military part of information security. Same applies to state secret information security. Well, we do have an organization like this called FSDEC, or Federal Service for Information Security, I think, right? Well, I do agree, it's a sorry state. Because, Russian courts, are already suing people or finding people criminally responsible for catching Pokemons in churches, but they are not really taking information security seriously. Well, back in Soviet times, we didn't disclose too much information. Well, you may remember this case when a robot was procured in Germany in order to manage the Chernobyl incident. It went haywire the moment it was delivered because we were not really honest about the magnitude of the problem in place, or in question. Some regulators try to collect this information, but what we usually get is kind of massaged data. But there is still a type of data that you believe, say, data pertaining to current attacks that could be directed at other members of the industry, that should be shared, I believe. I hope we'll start sharing this information sometime soon. Fully support this idea of information sharing, and let me give you several examples. Take a fusion center of a large bank in the United States. Now, we went there on a visit. It was interesting. On their dashboard, they've got websites of the big vendors that they rely on, and we all know the names of these corporations, starting with Microsoft, what have you. Now, they're also monitoring update availability. So if I calculate like 50 or 60 nodes they're monitoring, most of them are green naturally. So I'm asking them why they need those traffic lights. And they say, you know what, we know that if they have a problem, we will have a problem. So in times of a threat, we'll badly need those updates. So that's how they did. Let me give you several useful examples. Now, banking is a very delicate industry. So perps will be using cards, mobile numbers, fake accounts. If we know that a particular card or phone number have already been compromised, naturally our fraud detection system should operate on this data. Take, for example, external perimeter detection, intrusion detection system. It's pretty difficult to set CBS up on high traffic channels. If you really want to be paranoid, we can blacklist IP addresses of school kids, for example, and differentiate between them and real perps. We would really appreciate having this information that a particular IP address has already been implicated in some attacks. So he has a rating, say, of 1000. So I do believe it is a fashionable thing, it's a useful thing, but it won't work for some organizations. What I'm referring to here is naturally the maturity level of your information security system or your SOC. Depending on the model underlying your SOC, you will have a different set of processes. HP has got 12 processes, IBM has got 26 processes. This is the foundation for your threat intelligence to work properly. It's a matter of how well your threat monitoring and IS management are working. Now, threat intelligence is a superstructure for it all. It won't exist without such a foundation. I do agree, Boris, that things you've mentioned are useful, but I would also like to second the idea that it's pretty difficult to provide for all that. In civil security, I can hardly imagine a system like this. You know what? Now, I'm thinking that you guys, have got your emails and cloud services you trust, such as Gmail or Mail.ru or what have you. And that was your own decision to entrust it. Maybe eventually we shall have a service that will enjoy the same level of trust, where you would like to share information about successful attacks against you. Well, as a state system, so to speak, as a public service, we're often the target of persistent attacks. In November 2015, we got the approval from FSB and Federal Service for Technology and Export Control, FSTC, hereinafter, for our system. And we're only using information security tools approved by those organizations, most of them written by Russian corporations. Now we try to stay on the good side, so to speak, of the legislation in this country. Please tell us if something is wrong with our rules, and we're open to those discussions, and we'll tell you if we have any issues. Yeah, we'll be happy to share information on our incidents. We certainly support the idea of information exchanges. Well, in fact, WannaCry, we were able to, combat WannaCry pretty successfully because of information exchange. Secondly, information exchange is already happening. At least this is true for the public sector. And the role the regulator plays in this respect is already colossal. So we'll discover, say, new signatures, and we'll share them. So it's good when your experience can be of use to other organizations. I think it has been since 2013 that we've been sharing this information with more than with the lion's share, in fact, of Russian CRTs. We usually do it on ad hoc basis, though, when faced with a particular threat. And on our infrastructure, we can get feeds. We know how to check them on the infrastructure and what kind of rules to devise for information security. But we can also impose certain data that transits the network. Or, for example, we can monitor CNC servers. Oh, we recently monitored all the requests from Russian machines to a particular switch. So we're basically now developing a system that would match our data with the external feeds we're getting. It's taking time, but it is a high priority activity for us. In the future, we'll need to develop a system for automated checking. Well, indeed, you've got a unique situation here. You can actually generate unique feeds. Are you planning to sell them in the future? Well, there are so many other organizations that can do that. I won't comment on that, says Muslim. Well, information exchange is a great thing. Everybody needs it. Nobody wants to be the first one. As a member of a private company, I like to say that if you discover information on threats incidentally, it's pretty easy to share it. If you've got hundreds of servers generating threat intelligence data, if you employ dozens of people here, well, the question arises, why should you share this information free of charge? You also got to remember that in threat intelligence, whatever two people know, everybody knows. And as Timur has said, there are good hackers, researchers, but what happens very often is that after a conference where you've disclosed a particular malware, hackers will actually change their tactic like 30 minutes later. We are being monitored, so I'm sending my hellos to the baddies as well. So probably we should contain or restrict information disclosures of this nature. But take Kaspersky Labs, for example. They've got open source feeds, they've got open source matching systems. And you can actually connect to KSN, Kaspersky Security Network, to double check for botnet inclusion, so to speak, of your machines. I actually consider Rostelecom as MSSP, so we can actually develop an open source threat intelligence platform together with other MSSPs. And everybody will put their open source feeds. It won't cost you much, right? Just the money required to maintain several servers, peanuts. And that we can make it available as a source of intelligence for Russian corporations. We may actually want to limit access to it to Central Bank of Russia, FinCERT. But we can start with open source data that's already out there. That sounds like a good idea. I'm wondering if everybody will be happy with it. It may stand in the way of the commercial interests of individual companies. I think they should make this decision. And I think it could be actually a great pre-sale tool, right? So you can actually add a malware hash. I mean, you can say, you know what, that's certainly... Actually, that's how VirusTotal does it. Well, everybody knows that VirusTotal is free of charge. But if you want to have access to full information they provide, you gotta pay. I think that would be a good pre-sale idea. Yevgeny says he agrees. Please join us. We'll set up the interface. OpenISA stakes everything. Everything needed has all been developed in the West. Sergey, how do you think we're going to use it? Tell me of a use case, okay? We get the feeds. We subscribe to everything. So, what happens next? How do you set up the process? Well, in Kaspersky Labs, they've got connectors to all CMs. And I think that CM here is a natural entry point. Many protection systems know how to talk to ISC or Yarko. The problem with such an open source system is that there will be context limitations, and they may actually require additional activity on the part of those who actually, have events triggered. But you know what? That's a genetic drawback, if you like, of an open source system. Do you think it makes sense for us to limit it all to the Russian market? Do you think there is a commercial potential for this market? Or it should actually better stay open source public sector solution? We'll take outside partner. How much they were valued at? Cyber threat intelligence is more than just feeds, right? There is also strategic cyber threat intel that actually can cost quite a lot of money. A lot has been said today already about the role the state can play in providing for a secure, better protected environment. Individual citizens cannot really provide for their safety. We should take it for granted, be it physical security or cyber security. In fact, the bank should be responsible for card security. The state should be responsible for the security of e-government services. So the organizations in question should become customers for this system. I will support the big idea here, but cybersecurity literacy is a very important thing. You know what? We only started washing our hands properly relatively recently, and hygiene is a hugely important thing. Digital technologies are developing so fast. It shouldn't be surprising that the understanding of those issues lags behind, particularly among seniors. So many people, still give out their cards in restaurants. They give people they don't know their mobile phones to make calls. They give access codes to different systems. They fall prey to social engineers. So I think it's actually a multifaceted problem. But let's not discard literacy issues. Well, password-based security is the name of the game now, right? It has been for quite some time. Do kids actually learn at school what is a good password and what isn't? Look at the state channels. Are those matters discussed there? No, they aren't. Now you keep saying that the world has gotta be secure and that we gotta develop better solution. That's a well-intentioned BS. Or rather, it's true, but there is so much else that needs to be done. I do agree that mass market security is pretty much non-existent. Individual users are completely insecure because they are parts of botnets and they are effectively transmitters and transceivers, if you like, of whatever the hacker does. But you know what? Nobody really invested in mass security. Have we actually done anything to help those people? The lights are on, but nobody's home for this kind of customers? I'll take the large banks. Have they done any cybersecurity literacy campaigns for their customers? No, they haven't. Nobody really owns mass market security. So many people pawn it. It is an orphan. I'm sorry. You know what? When I launch Sberbank online, it tells me that it will do antivirus checking on my smartphone. Is that really true? It is no secret that our Android version of our mobile bank is running Kaspersky checks. And without Kaspersky, it would have been much more difficult for us, actually. I will disagree with your statement about the banks not investing in it. Actually, had they not invested in it, they would have been broke. It's a dangerous world. We often tell the following number. If 10 years ago, only 2% of all crimes were technological ones, it's the other way around now. Over 90% of all crimes today are perpetrated using high tech. So less than 10% require guns or crowbars or what have you, or lockpicks. The world has changed. It's a shame we have to wind up now when everybody is, so energized. It's great that we are having such a passionate discussion. I'm afraid we won't be able to answer the question about top 3 threats and protection against them. But I believe we have had a very good discussion of these 3 big subjects. And I'm certainly inviting everybody to do simple but powerful things, like knowing your perimeter, protecting your perimeter. If you know exactly what is there in your perimeter and should be there, that gives you such a cheap but reliable protection. I believe it is very difficult to protect us in the current paradigm. I love this example. That previously, when people lived in villages, they didn't really have police, because it was pretty clear to find the thief. But when urbanization started, police became an important social kind of service. So, in the 21st century, we will need new security tools, particularly on the cyber side. And it's good that we have conferences like this one, because we can discuss all those issues here.
Спасибо большое. А? Я был открыт.
Send me out some backup. I want to bring this guy down before he hurts somebody. me out your